Okay, now we're going to mark for our Curling Amish Feather border, and you can see that we have our border here all stitched out, and normally you would just be stitching the inside of your border, and this would be the outer edge of the quilt unless it were actually an inner border that you were doing this with. Our first registration mark is going to be the 45-degree angle right here in this corner. We're going to line it up, put our registration mark. Then we're going to want to find the center of our quilt. And the center of our quilt, I had already measured, and right here is the center of that border. We're going to put a registration line right on the center. And our next mark that we're going to make is the very center line right in the center of the border. For that center registration line, what we're going to do is determine how wide your border is, locate the center. In this case, it just happens to be a 6-inch border. So I'm going to line up a square in the corner, 3 inches in, and mark right in the middle of that border with my registration lines. I'm going to continue all the way across the quilt with those registration lines. All the way around to the other side. We would have already put in our miter on the right side of the quilt, and now we're going to start drawing our circles, or our 3/4 circles, to actually lay in our Curling Amish Feather. To mark our circles, we start in the upper left corner, and we place our circle template dead center right on this center chalk line or registration line. Put it dead center on there. We're actually going to mark 3/4. Start down here, come all the way around, back to the center line. So you're doing from center line around to center line. Move your ruler down, line it up right on the center of your registration mark. Come around 3/4 of a circle. Slide your ruler down, line up your center line, and then you flip the opposite way, down. Now that pretty much takes care of my throat space. So I'm going to stop marking there. And what we have is we have our center that comes around, flips up with the first circle, and the second circle flips down towards the body of the quilt. Now we're going to head up to the top, and we're going to mark all the way across the top. As we head our way across the top of that Curling Amish Feather to mark the circles, we already have our 3/4 in the corner. We're going to take our ruler template, line it up right on that line. We're going to come around, and we're going to flip the first one out of the corner, up 3/4. Slide the template over. Again, line that center up. Now this one flipped up, the next one is going to flip down. Three-quarters of the way down. And then we're going to slide right across the top and mark the whole top border. Flip up, flip down. As we get close to the center of the border of the quilt, which is this line right here, we have our template here that we've done a 3/4 circle. If we were to slide that over, one more circle, we have this very small space right here in which to put our feather fronds. Now, typically what I like to do is, as a rule of thumb, I like about half the distance of the circle minimum to do my feather fronds that meet in the center that are going to mirror the ones coming from the opposite way. Now, obviously, if we do this, there's just a small space here. It doesn't meet what I consider to be my minimum requirement to do that and have them look very, very lovely. And when I remove that, we see this large space here, and I would rather have nice long feather fronds that are a little more than the width of one circle than to have the shorter fronds. So I'm going to err towards longer fronds. And also, secondly, a lot of people do have a preference whether or not they would like to end with the circle in towards the body of the quilt or up towards the outside edge of a quilt. Actually, my preference is typically, I love it when it comes and I can do that out towards the top. The fact that this one is going down, it's still going to be very lovely, and you'll actually be able to see how that looks. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, even though normally, yeah, sure, I'd like them to swing up, but swinging down is also just as lovely. So let's go ahead and quilt this out so we can see what this looks like. I've locked my stitches. Now we're going to go up with that figure 8, right into the corner, come down, go right down to that center portion of that border. We're going to come down and follow our mark around. Remember, it doesn't have to be exact. That chalk is going to wipe away anyways. I'm going to curl around, come around and down the spine. Speed up my machine just a little bit. Come around, down the spine, down the spine, down the spine, back towards that figure 8, C shape towards the figure 8, C shape, C shape. Start stretching those feather fronds right up to the edge of that border. Back towards the figure 8, towards the figure 8, figure 8, figure 8. Lay it right into that figure 8. Now we're going to come down and come right to your miter line. Come back around towards the figure 8. Up towards the figure 8. And every feather frond is going to stretch right to that miter line. Bring it to the miter line. Miter line. Come right down to the edge of that inner border. Come around, come around, come around. Now we're going to start going up into that next Curling Amish Feather circle. We're going to keep those fronds just a little bit smaller so we don't take up all of our space. I'm getting close to my chalk registration for the next circle, so I want to lay that thread right on that chalk mark. Come around, stretch it up to the border edge. Come around and down, down, tuck in our next one, backtrack down the spine, back to the figure 8, and now we're going to head across the top. Now we're going to work across the top, follow our chalk registration line, come around, do our first flip in, bring that feather frond right around, up towards the figure 8s. Remember that C shape. C shape. C shape. Now we want to start stretching them up towards the top border, or the outer border, I should say. C shape, right towards the figure 8s. Figure 8, figure 8, figure 8. Squeeze in that last feather frond right next to the top figure 8. Come down, up towards the figure 8. Work down the center. Down the center. Meeting right in that miter point. Once we hit the edge of that border, we try to bring every feather frond down to the edge of that border. Come out. Now we start going up into that next circle. Don't go too far. Nice short feather fronds. Getting close to that chalk line. Feather frond right on the chalk line. Start stretching them up toward the border. The outer edge, right there. Right there. Right there. Short fronds. Short fronds. We're going to backtrack around. And now we're going to come out between those two feather fronds, right on that chalk mark, and do our next flip. Now we're going to come out between those two feather fronds, right on that mark, come around, go into our curl, bring that frond back towards the previous feather curl, into the previous, sink it right in there. Now we can snug some little feather fronds right up against the previous fronds. Come up, 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 down to the spine, down to the spine. Remember, you can do your woodcuts. Now we're going to go into the next circle, so we want to start making those feather fronds a little bit smaller. There's that chalk line. Feather frond right on the chalk line. Right up to that inner border. Stretch it out, back. Tuck in some of those small ones. Backtrack around the spine. Come between the two fronds. Swing into the next one. Down the spine. Down the spine. Down the spine. Tuck it in. Up. And repeat that process all the way across your quilt to the very center. Now we're going to do our last curling Amish feather all the way to the center. And we're going to stretch these fronds out right to the center and meet right on the line. Start our machine. Go around into our curl. Come around, feather frond, back toward the previous curling. Tuck a little one right in there, head up, tuck it in, right to the outer edge of the border. And now we're going to start stretching them right out toward the center. Bring it around. Bring it around. Tuck it in, come around. Way around with that C shape. Way around with that C shape. Stretch it right out to that center line. Squeeze in that last one. Now, stretch it right up to that inner edge of that border. Sink in your little fronds, backtrack around, lock your stitches. Now, when we backtrack back around, even though this was the end of the feather and we ended right here, I wanted to come down all the way to here because that first feather frond that we did when we went into our curl came back to the spine right here. If we would have stopped here, that little backtrack would have been obvious, but if we bring that backtrack all the way back to where that first feather frond came into the spine, that's going to hide that a lot better. We're continuing to work down the side with our curling Amish feather, and we're almost to the middle here. We have the middle line right here, and so we have 2 curling feathers to do to complete it. And what we want to do is once we finish this point, you have 2 choices. You can either measure the distance here and go down and start new registration marks with this distance in between. Of course, remember, you want to flip it up because this one's flipping up to continue down the sides, or you can go down the sides with a light basting stitch and then start from the bottom and work your way back up towards the middle. The one thing that I will add is it's a judgment call on your end. Now, I typically don't want to roll back and forth on my quilt. So as I'm working down the sides with my curling Amish feather, normally I'm then sliding over and I'm continuing to complete the body of the quilt. So that way I don't have to re-roll. I'm not doing the whole border first and then coming back and filling up the center. I'm actually, as I'm going, working down the sides within my throat space. So again, that's a judgment call on your end. Okay, let's begin and work our way down to the middle on that side.